The Toronto Maple Leafs are still looking to find a consistent game. It's been up and down all season, including a heartbreaking overtime loss over the weekend against the Boston Bruins. David Morassutti of Locked On Leafs is here to talk about that and how things can get better for Toronto. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Just download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Leafs, David Morassutti. And David, such a up and down season for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Still a team struggling to find consistency. What do you think is the big missing ingredient on this team right now that's preventing them from finding a consistent groove?
I think it's just the star players need to have more consistent outings, right? They haven't had all their best players come through at the same time. You know, to start the year, William Nylander is the guy, right? Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner were kind of, playing well, but not playing to their potential. And, then they make this switch around to try to get more cohesiveness throughout the lineup. I think that's really it too, is like there's not that cohesiveness from top to bottom with this group. And then obviously the blue line, right? There's overcompensating at times for the blue line and how they've played and, trying to figure out who the goaltending is going to be. There's just so many. Sheldon Keefe is trying so many different things to see what's going to work. And because there hasn't really been that consistency, it's really plagued them, and until they kind of keep things on a consistent basis, whether it's the lines on a consistent basis, the goaltending rotation on a consistent basis, and also getting some guys back from injuries, this is the sort of thing that you're gonna be dealing with the Leafs. And it's not something that, is uncommon. Like last year, the Leafs had their struggles earlier in the year, and eventually they found a rhythm and got better. This time around, I just think that you look at the way that the Atlantic is this year, there's a lot more competition, a lot more teams really pushing this year rather than last year when it was like three teams and then, three teams just kind of waiting for the playoffs because everything's been set in stone so early.
Yeah, no, definitely a big difference. Talk to me about the goaltending because Ilya Samsonov has not statistically looked great. Joseph Woll kind of taking over more as the starter. What's going on in net and how much of it is the goaltending and how much of it is the defense the team is playing in front of those goalies?
Yeah, I think to start the year, Ilya Samsonov had his struggles, and large in part because the defense in front of him wasn't good, right? They're consistently allowing 4 or more goals at home, which, that just can't happen, right? And so eventually Joseph Woll came in. He looked really good, and then things kind of leveled off because he was kind of bailing out a defense that wasn't playing well. Now the defense has sort of improved a little bit. Things have kind of settled a bit. And Joseph Woll right now is running away, I think, with the job. Are they really ready right now to name Joseph Woll the number one goaltender? No, I don't think so. I think they still want Samsonov to battle for it. But for right now, because they've been going back and forth between the two, it's so hard as a goaltender to get a rhythm, to get yourself going. You still need to have a little bit of rotation. I get that Joseph Woll has never been a starter in the NHL. He really hasn't played a lot of hockey. Injuries have kind of been his issue, in through his development. this is now Joseph Woll's kind of first time really to show he's capable of being a starter. And I went into this year thinking there's a really good chance that he could come in and potentially win a job over Samsonov for two reasons. One, he signed past this year. Samsonov is a pending free agent. The Leafs are going to want to see what they have in Joseph Woll to see if they are comfortable giving him that job going forward. And he came into the playoffs last year when Samsonov got hurt, and he performed very well, right? So this is a player who not only has that future part, right, seen as a bit of the future guy, but also the performances have dictated he deserves more opportunity. And yeah, a bit of a rough one for him against Boston. I thought he played well enough to win, but there were some, minor blimps there, but he gave the Leafs a chance to win. He's been giving them a chance to win almost every single game he's been in. They've been rather close. So I think right now Joseph Woll's the guy until, he's not. In my opinion, I think that's where they have to go.
You mentioned Samsonov's contract being up at the end of the year. Another player whose contract is up, William Nylander. Talk to me about his future with the team and where the team goes from here with him.
Yeah, it's a case of the classic Toronto where a player is doing so well, fans are worried about how the heck they're going to keep him. And not just keep him, but afford him. Because this team has gone into every single season with such a top-heavy lineup at forwards with Matthews and Marner and Tavares all making over $10 million. Yes, the cap is going up, but William Nylander is putting himself in that conversation of earning. Going into the season, nobody was talking about thinking the Leafs were going to pay Nylander over $10 million. Everyone was kind of saying maybe 10 is the max. He should be getting lower than that based on what he has shown. So the question the Leafs have right now is, can they get Nylander to buy in a little bit here? And I think that's kind of where, Brad Schliving says they're keeping things open, right? Nylander, I don't think he's too concerned about the contract, but I think the Leafs are concerned that you've now got a guy who is performing in a contract year and you want to pay him and he's deserving to get paid based on how he's played so far. You always get a little concerned if the play is going to dip back a little bit to what we've seen in the past few years and if that number is going to be a little bit too much for him. But, he's 27. This is when you pay these guys. If they can get him signed to a long-term deal, I think the Leafs will want to get it done. It's just now a matter of how do they get it all to work? How do you get the math to all work?
Going to be a big question, and we'll keep an eye on that throughout the season and maybe even into the off season. David, the team is struggling with its consistency, as we said. I know there were some rumors in the last week about a possible trade with Calgary that fell through. What moves, if any, do you think this team is going to make between now and the trade deadline?
They got to beef up that blue line. It was a concern going into this year. The only move they made was to go and get John Klingberg. He's now on the shelf. There's a talk about whether he's even going to come back this year based on it being a hip injury and if that's going to need an operation, because we know as soon as you have a hip operation, that likely ends your season. So that's the first domino that would have to be either fall or have to be figured out. And then you gain that cap space, but there aren't teams going out and saying, here's the top 4 guy ready for you, right? The Leafs tried to get the Zadorov trade done, but from what it sounds like, they want to do Zadorov and Chris Tanev. Chris Tanev, I think, being the bigger target for them because he is a true top 4 defenseman. That's exactly what they need. They need someone with reliability that's going to be able to take some pressure off of Morgan Rielly and TJ Brody. For me, seeing how this blue line has played with Giordano, Liljegren, and now Klingberg, 3 regulars out of the lineup. Lagesson, Simon Benoit have played really well during this time. Connor Timmins is getting that everyday opportunity that he hadn't really gotten. But it's clear to me that this team does need that top 4 guy. And because then it gives you depth and other guys move down. So I think getting that top 4 defenseman is going to be so crucial for the Leafs. I think right now it's tough to say who that player is because the only name right now out there is Chris Tanev. There aren't many teams putting out defensemen in the open market because they want to wait until the prices go up close to the trade deadline. Unfortunately for the Leafs, they might not be able to wait that long. They might want to get a deal done now, and that's going to limit what they can bring back.
Is there a preference for a left or right-handed shot, or?
Well, I'd say the right side is the area that needs the most work because Klingberg was a righty, Liljegren was a righty. They're both out. Liljegren will come back eventually. There's no real date or timetable set up for when he's going to come back. He just started skating. It was an ankle injury. That's going to take some time to ramp back up. So I think right side is the preference, and that's what makes it tougher. There aren't many right defensemen right now out there. Jake McCabe actually had to be switched from the left side to the right side because they don't have many options. Connor Timmins is their only right shooting defenseman right now playing. So I think if there is a preference, it's a player that can play the right side.
All right, David, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find you on social media and where they could find the podcast?
Yeah, you can go and find the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. Also on YouTube, Locked On Leafs. And you can follow me on X at @_Morassutti.
All right, David, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could do the same thing with your business team? Well, if you're building a roster to win the league, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like instant match assessments and virtual interviews. Hate waiting? Indeed's U.S. data shows that over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you need to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost for application processing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed.